Good morning, everyone. My name is Caroline Ott. I am an advisor to Carbon to Sea, and I'm happy to be here with you all kicking off our second day. We'll be talking about exploring markets and OAE's place. So this session will explore various perspectives on the role of markets and commercial actors in shaping the OAE sector. By the end of this session, we want you to walk away with a better understanding of three things. So firstly, we want you to have an understanding of the state of the market. In other words, the scale and the shape of commercial investment and commercial activity in OAE. Secondly, we want to share a range of perspectives on what role commercial actors should play in the near term, in the next 1 to 2 years of the sector. And thirdly, we want to share perspectives on what's needed to realize a responsible sector or a responsible market. The starting point for this discussion, so we spent much of yesterday talking about the really remarkable progress, but also some of the outstanding uncertainties surrounding OAE. Given these uncertainties, Carbon to Sea's aim isn't quite as simple as accelerating the growth of the market or accelerating the growth of the sector. Rather, we're interested in supporting transparent exploration and learning around OAE, while addressing critical uncertainties around safety and efficacy. At the same time, we recognize that the market is really rapidly progressing. Private financing is outpacing public and philanthropic capital. And as we started to discuss yesterday, there are a number of actions that we must take today in order to realize a market in 3 years, in 5 years, even 10 years down the line. In short, we want to ensure that the enabling conditions for a market exist and are in place if OAE is proven safe and ready for scale. So this leads us to our exam question for this session. What role should commercial actors play in OAE in the next 1 to 2 years, given remaining uncertainties around safety, efficacy, and MRV? In a few minutes, I'll invite our excellent speakers to share their perspectives on this question, but I'm going to kick us off by first presenting on a few trends related to market and commercial activity. Okay, so let's start by looking at the supplier landscape. And supplier here really refers to project developers or startups. We've seen over 30 suppliers established between 2019 and 2026. Which have collectively raised at least $372 million via public and private funds. This is inclusive of credit sales. These suppliers span 4 technology categories, and the vast majority of these companies were founded over the last 5 years. We saw a real uptick in the founding of these companies around 2021, 2022. Of these 30-some suppliers, about half have sold credits totaling nearly 700,000 tons. These credit sales can take the form of pre-purchase agreements or also offtake agreements, and I wanted to take a minute to explain that difference. So with pre-purchase agreements, that funding is provided up front. These are typically smaller deal sizes for earlier stage companies. With offtake, a price and volume is agreed between the buyer and the supplier for future delivery. For those offtake agreements, we're typically seeing larger deal sizes, and these are companies at a more advanced stage. I think what's notable here is that we're seeing far more pre-purchase agreements, so about 30 pre-purchase agreements compared to 6 offtake agreements. But the offtake agreements, again, are much larger. So these offtake agreements account for 98% of the transacted volume in the market. Credit deliveries are much smaller. So I think totaling just around 3,000 tons, and this underscores an important point, which is that the market, when we refer to the market today, is really about financing. It's really about getting offtake agreements and financing into companies. It's not so much about using OAE credits to make net zero claims or to make compensatory claims on a corporate basis. And we can come back to that distinction and why that matters a bit later. On credit pricing, so the numbers you're seeing here are from 18 transactions across the 4 technology categories. Credit price is pretty variable, as you can see, ranging from around $700 a ton to $1,700 a ton, depending on pathway. And I think one important note here that's not on the slide is the difference between price and cost. So you're looking at the prices. These are prices that are negotiated between the project developers, the suppliers, and the buyers. The cost may be very different. So when we look at this, remember this is the price in those negotiated contracts. The cost rather depends on many factors. So this depends on buyer willingness to pay. This depends on the required profit margin. This depends on the company's willingness to operate at a loss for a period of time while they're getting scaled up. So taking into account these differences between price and cost, and remembering that these are prices and not the actual or real cost of removing and storing carbon. Turning to the buyer side, so the market is fairly concentrated with 13 known buyers. We see Frontier really leading in the number of transactions, and we see Microsoft leading on total credit volume. A couple of notes on Microsoft's pause in purchasing, since this has been all over the news in the last couple of weeks, and I think has set off a little bit of doom and gloom in the industry, but I wanted to note 2 points. One is that Microsoft's CDR program was always built around a 2030 net zero target. So even before these headlines, even before this announcement, we knew that the current pace of buying was going to slow. Further, we knew that these purchases were never going to be sufficient to get to the scale of market required. For that, we need some form of regulated demand or compliance market. I think also worth mentioning, and CDR.FYI did a great analysis on the non-Microsoft, non-Frontier portion of the market, and found that that portion of the market has actually been rapidly growing in recent years, roughly doubling every year. So I think just to underscore that Microsoft is not the entire market. We've always known that this needs to transfer into a regulated or compliance market. And I think the headlines underscore those points, but they aren't necessarily new points as far as the evolution of the market is concerned. Okay. All right, looks like we're missing a final slide here, but I'm going to tell you a bit about the funding and investment landscape. So what we've seen from the funding and investment side is that private investment is really outpacing philanthropic and public investment into the sector. We're seeing at least 60% of abiotic MCDR funding coming from the private sector, and that's probably an underestimate. That data is just a bit harder to find than the public and philanthropic investment. And this really leaves us with, I think, a few points and a few reflections for this session. So first, that public and philanthropic investment is probably not going to be sufficient to scale the sector. Secondly, that the private sector is really playing an important role in advancing evaluation and learning around OAE. Thirdly, a sector that commercializes too quickly, however, may really risk the medium to long-term growth of the sector. So I think we're trying to figure out what that right pace is. What's the right pace of commercialization in order to enable learning and evaluation while also making sure that we're not running ahead too quickly on the private actors and private sector side of things. So a lot to discuss here. With that, I would like to start inviting our speakers up to the stage. I'll quickly introduce them as we get started. I've also asked them to share their favorite oceans-based book or movie. So if you're like me, you spend your long flights just working and being pretty miserable the whole time. But if you're not like me, I hope to leave you with some book and movie recommendations for your travels home. Great, so I'm going to welcome John Mimikakis. Dr. John Mimikakis is a vice president in EDF's Oceans program. John works with policymakers, scientists, economists, and partner organizations to create healthy and abundant oceans that benefit people and nature. He has fought to advance climate change legislation in the U.S., previously serving for nearly a decade in a variety of science and environmental policy advisory roles in the U.S. House of Representatives. John's favorite ocean-based book is The Great Reclamation by Rachel Heng. Selena Scott Buechler is an assistant professor of public policy at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. Her research examines the governance of climate and energy transitions with a focus on how policy design and implementation can be responsive to climate justice needs. Selena's ocean-based book of choice is The Log from the Sea of Cortez by John Steinbeck. Luke Connell. Luke is the co-founder of Carbon Run. He has a proven track record as a small business founder and philanthropic team builder through his role as executive director of the Omega Foundation's Smart Saver program. Prior to co-founding Carbon Run, Luke founded and co-owned a popular 3-location Toronto restaurant. And Luke's oceans-based movie choice is Castaway. Joe. Dr. Joe Kachanoff is the CEO and co-founder of Crew Carbon, where he leads the integration of carbon removal technology within the global wastewater sector. A biogeochemist with over 12 years of expertise, Dr. Kachanoff has successfully bridged the gap between deep tech research and industrial application, raising over $30 million in financing and securing high-profile carbon offtake agreements. Joe's ocean-based movie of choice, which he gave me on the spot yesterday, is Jaws. Danny. Danny Broberg is the policy lead for Stripe, Climate, and for Frontier, a $1 billion plus advanced market commitment focused on putting carbon removal industry on its best path forward. With over a decade of experience in carbon management policy, government, and academia, Danny's work focuses on building out government-linked demand to high-scale durability carbon removal. Danny's ocean-based movie of choice is My Octopus Teacher.